Please welcome Imara Jones, founder and CEO, Translash Media. Ayan Kishore, CEO, Benetech. And moderator, Danielle Forward, CEO and co-founder, Natives Rising.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Forward, CEO and co-founder of Natives Rising. We economically empower Indigenous people with careers in technology and entrepreneurship, and we're also inspiring the next generation of Indigenous women in STEM with AI workshops and community. And with that said, I'm super excited to talk to these other leaders that are mediating their communities with technology as well. So I'd love to start with Imara. Imara, your tagline at Translash is telling trans stories to save trans lives. I hope the audience is aware of how much both misrepresentation and direct hate show up online and in person. What does Translash focus on as an antidote or alternative, and how do you change the conversation?
I think we say that because it's a fact that trans people and trans communities are roughly just around 1% of the population on a good day. And what's fascinating is that if you look at the political conversation about trans people, the cultural conversation about trans people, the education conversation around trans people, you would think that trans people were 80% of the population. There's an outsized obsession that's just not matched by the numbers.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the reasons why is because so much of the fear of the unknown that comes at a time of tremendous technological change needs to find an expression for people. And so many people have directed that anxiety about a great many things, the use of technology to make kids trans, which is absurd, and all these other things, onto this small group of people. And the smallness actually counterintuitively drives the obsession. And it drives the obsession because 2 out of 3 Americans, because of the small numbers, say that they don't personally know someone who's trans. And so within the gap between what people know and what they think is where ignorance comes in, and is the space that's filled by fear and by hate. And we know from the past that whether we like it or not, the bottom line is that most stories about trans people, given the history of trans people in the United States and elsewhere, those stories are transphobic. And so that means that in the absence of knowledge, in the absence of language, in the absence of reality, what gets filled in those gaps at this time of anxiety are these transphobic stories that amplify these other fears. So what that means is that we have to find other ways, we have to find other technologies, quite frankly, of bridging that gap. And that's where storytelling comes in. Because in order to know your story, given the range of media that we now have, I don't have to personally know you, right? I just have to be able to personally access your story. And therefore, that means that what is an anecdote to the ignorance, what is an anecdote to the fear, what can be a force multiplier in terms of knowing us and connecting us are stories, and stories that we tell by using technology.
Gosh, that's such a beautiful statement, and in the Indigenous community also representing a very small number at times.
That's right.
I have found a lot of solidarity and inspiration from the trans community as well, being the only one that they know that's Indigenous, or they don't know anyone that's Indigenous. And yeah, storytelling has been so profound, and I'd love to learn more from you on that.
And there's so many people who are Indigenous and trans.
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely. Such an even smaller number. Ayan, Benetech provides learning content for a broad spectrum of people, particularly those with disabilities. Can you give us an example of what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, sure. So, I think it's best to start here by imagining if you're a student at MIT, you all don't need to imagine that. And say you have a disability, right? So say you have severe low vision, or you have neurodivergence, such as dyslexia. And the way you could read is by being able to hear content or be able to, manipulate the text of the content to have it in large font, etc. Right? So if you're in a class, say you're in a psychology class, or that amazing professor from the media lab in their class, and they assigned you a reading and a textbook, your peers are going to be able to go buy the book at the bookstore or go to the library and get the book. But if you're a student with a disability, to be able to consume that, maybe the first place you turn to is your disability support office, right? And you go there, and they will try to go get the digital book of it and convert it into an accessible format. If you can't find a digital book, they have to literally buy the book and scan it page by page. And it's been a week, and your class is back up, and you've not had a chance to read.
Wow.
Your learning is basically averted. There's social and emotional impact of not being able to participate in class discussions and so on and so forth. So luckily, what we are trying to do is sort of prevent the inaccessibility of content being a barrier for learning. So, and we realize that disability is a spectrum. So for different learners and different reasons, truly all of us have learning differences. But being able to take a book and be available at the time you need it, along with your peers, is what we try to solve. So right now, in fact, if you go to the Disability Support Office, one of the services they will actually recommend you to is Bookshare, which is our platform. So you can go into Bookshare. You're highly likely to find the book. In fact, it's the largest one in the world. You have 1.3 million books there that you can basically hear the content. You can convert it into refreshable braille. You can put it in a large font.
Wow.
And all of those supports actually allow you to consume it at the same time. So that's perhaps the biggest way we're trying to help remove the barrier of accessibility in learning.
That's incredible. Wow. So on the communities that each of you both have built, I'm curious, Imara, can you talk about the community that's developed as Translash has expanded its work, and how has technology enabled the trans community to come together so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that given the fact that trans people are such a small part of the population, it is easy for trans people outside of some urban cores to be isolated from themselves and each other. If you live in rural America, for example, that's a really good example. Or if you live on a reservation, which we had someone reach out to us about. So I think that one of the things that technology does is that it allows for the formation of community. So it doesn't only serve this purpose, as I said before, of talking to the rest of the country in this case. It allows for trans people to be able to network and to form community and to not be isolated. And we know that there are very real health impacts from feeling a sense of community, right? Not only in terms of mental health, but physical health, sense of well-being. So there are all these really important things that we have about forming community, and I think that social media in particular has been a really powerful tool for trans people, I would say over the last 10 years. And that's why some of the closing of those platforms through various rules and making them more of a walled garden that are opaque has a disproportionate impact on communities. And it's also one of the things that we have to think about as we move forward with AI. It's one of the things that we're beginning to think about as an organization, which is, how can a technology that basically works off of large data sets as its ability to be able to form and be effective, how, when you have such a small group of people where there is not a lot of data, and where a lot of the data and the stories and the language that are used are quite frankly toxic, what is the best way to make sure that that technology doesn't become weaponized, doesn't become an impediment towards some of the things that we're talking about?
Absolutely. Ayan, how is the disability community part of Benetech's planning and management? And how has designing for disability made better products for other learners?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, I mean, I'm privileged to get to serve this community, right? And any of us in the position that we get to represent a community, we've got to make sure that the community is involved in everything from decision making to building the products, right from the top to the bottom, to the front line. So in our case, from our board to our management to our people managers to those who are out there in the schools, they're either people with disabilities themselves, or they're caregivers, parents of those with disabilities, or oftentimes teachers. So for us that's important and it's particularly important since disability is a broad spectrum to have these voices in the decision making. But I think it doesn't really stop there, right? To me, the question is, and we're at Solve today. I think who is the solver is a really pretty important question, right? And I think if we're privileged enough to solve for other people, they need to be, part of the solution. So, we've thinking ahead, we have been thinking about how do we get, those with disabilities empowered to be solvers, to be the entrepreneurs of the future, to be those building the technology solutions like AI solutions, so that the solutions that are then created for everybody have less bias, right? So to us, it's going beyond just thinking of inclusion in our own sort of operations to really putting that in the programmatic work that we do. And so one of the areas that I am really excited about that we've been doing is trying to really nurture. And you mentioned that you've been working on STEM for Indigenous learners and people. For me, this is the same thing with the disabilities, right? We have a huge issue in that those with disabilities do not learn STEM subjects beyond a certain age, but generally in middle school. And as STEM jobs grow in the future, the chances of employment is reducing for those with disabilities. So we're trying to stem that inequity by really working on AI solutions to be able to make STEM content accessible. And we're thankful, you heard from the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. They, along with General Motors, have basically allowed us to build solutions so you can take math content, you can take chemistry content, and suddenly images like graphs or equations become accessible output. So, and the great thing is an accessible book is not just helpful for those who have disabilities, right? Like I was saying, everybody has a learning difference. Sometimes, I just like to hear, and that's how I consume sometimes much better. In fact, and there's so much data and science around, the fact that if you're able to have ability to manipulate typography, which as a designer at some point I was like, no, I like the way things are designed, but providing that into the hands of learners and consumers, we find actually the largest gains are those who are the most prolific readers actually by able to manipulate typography. It helps them. So these are not only those with disabilities. So those sorts of accommodations help everybody. And then I think more broadly, inclusion. And inclusive design helps everybody, right? An inclusive classroom is not just helpful for those with disabilities, it actually helps others. If you are designing a product that is designing for the extremes, these are not edge cases. If you build your product to be more universally designed, you are actually creating a better product. And I think that's what excites me every day, the work we do in designing these solutions. And I think I put that out as a challenge for everyone, is when you are designing, try to make your product as universal as possible.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I love that we can both share the background in product design. One of my favorite pieces of inspiration when designing for differently abled communities is your classic dip in the sidewalk, so that the wheelchairs can go down the sidewalk to cross the street.
Yeah.
And you'll see all these moms and dads with their strollers using it, or unhoused folks with shopping carts. And all these new use cases start emerging that maybe the people that originally designed the sidewalk didn't anticipate, but it's just one strong example of designing for differently abled folks and how a lot of people might actually benefit from the same design.
Exactly.
This is a question for both of you. We can start with Imara. How do new technologies help you meet your goals? Whether that's enabling your community to do something or mitigating a risk or opportunity.
I think that for us, the more that we can reach people in a faster way, it's just better, like when you're in media and when you can tell stories. So I think that we're always looking for technology that will allow us to do that. And that's kind of I'd say the North Star for us that's really, really, really important. At the same time, one of the things that, I mean, we saw this in an earlier piece, that you don't want to become overly reliant on certain forms of technology. One, because over-reliance on anything always creates a vulnerability. It just does. And secondly, with regards to new tools that are being developing, over-reliance actually could make it harder for us to use judgment, cognitive discernment, other things that are really important within a journalist organization, right? They can't be a stand-in for those things. And so I think that that's the balance that we constantly are working on and we're thinking about. The other thing that happens is technology is a wave that never stands still. So what we were doing, how we were doing it a year or two ago will change, especially with regards to some of the things that we're talking about. How we engage and use AI a year from now is going to be totally different than 3 years from now. It's going to be totally different than 5 years from now. And that's also why we're very cognizant of making sure that we try to cover as many forms of technology, legacy forms of technology and new forms of technology as possible in order to be able to reach the most people that we can, and also as a hedge against the instability of the newly emergent things. I really fear for people who become over-reliant on new forms of anything, because that can set up a vulnerability. If you were the company that's putting them forth, no, that's a huge opportunity. But as a user, as consumers, as people who are using these tools, I think we have to use a lot of judgment.
Thank you. And Ayan, what would be your response? And I can read the question again.
No, it's good. I mean, look, so there are some real risks when it comes to new technologies, and I'm going to zoom into AI. Particularly for marginalized communities, underserved communities, and that's why we're having this conversation, right? So the way those with disabilities are portrayed, those with disabilities use, for example, in a classroom today, students with disabilities are using ChatGPT and LLMs much more than their peers, but they're more at risk of actually having their data compromised and what that really might mean. They're more at risk of being disciplined. So there's some real challenges, right, we have with it, but the opportunities are immense. And I tend to be an optimistic, but have a good, healthy dose of pessimism. AI is literally changing today what technology, how we can enable those with disabilities, right? Like what glasses did for me as low vision so that I can live in this, and be having a complete meaningful existence without even thinking about what would have been a physical impediment for me, is what I think AI and digital tools are doing, right? So you can pick up your phone and point it at something and it will tell you what it is, right? Thanks to LLMs, right? In learning, you're able to get more personalized content, and for us, we are looking at how do you take a reading material and make it at the instantaneously at the appropriate reading level and reading style for a learner, right? And what that might do for those with learning differences. I think that text to speech and speech to text, which a lot of us just rely on now, those are sound very much human-like, which is huge because that used to be a huge barrier for consuming content, particularly for younger learners. There are some challenges, like we read in the news today about whose voices they are and all of that, and those do need to be solved, right? But so I think I'm really optimistic. I think this is a watershed moment. I think we need to appropriately and ethically move those solutions to actually serve the communities and have those with the communities involved in sort of designing those solutions. And from Benetech's standpoint, we are on this mission to use AI to eradicate inaccessibility, and I think that's what is exciting to us. So all of you should really be thinking about how do we use these tools and technologies in a way that is meaningful for the communities we serve, and there is immense opportunity.
Thank you both so much. Both of you are so inspiring, and I could talk to you forever, which is probably why we're a little bit over time, because I'm so interested in the work that you do. Thank you both seriously for everything you do for your communities, Imara and Ayan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.